organise this. So, hello, Prem. So yeah, thanks to Polar Impact for organising this, and the meeting's going to be recorded for the benefit of anyone who can't attend, but we'll stop the recording at the end and we'll take questions after that, after the recording is stopped, if that's okay. So people feel happy to answer questions without having their answers recorded. I'm going to try and trot through the content reasonably quickly. So if you can say, as I say, if you can save your questions to the end, that'll make life a lot easier. So I'm going to start at the beginning. Few latecomers coming in, but I'm just going to come pick it up and ask people to ask questions at the end. Also, you can leave questions in the chat and I'll pick them up as I go along. Yeah, we're going to try and go through about maybe 40 minutes of content, and then then we could do some questions. So a bit of an introduction. My background, I'm a postdoc researcher at Cardiff. I've actually just got a personal fellowship to work on glaciological instruments, but my background prior to joining Cardiff in 2019, I was an electronic engineer. I was a formally trained project manager. I led a lot of projects in industry, but I've also worked in polar science, both as a scientist and as a supporting engineer, and I've worked in Greenland and Antarctica a number of times. And the aim of this session is to really briefly introduce you to some ideas and tools that you can explore for yourself later. I'm not going to try and turn you into a fully fledged project manager in an hour, but I'm hoping that you will get enough of a flavour of the main techniques that you can go and read up for yourself later. And judging from what one or two people have said in the sort of build up to the session, I'm hoping that it will give you some confidence that project management is a thing you can do, and that it's not a big, scary, complicated thing that involves lots and lots of books and textbooks and complicated acronyms, which it sometimes can. The other thing I was going to say is, I'm not sure why am I not being highlighted in Zoom? Let's just see if I can spotlight myself. There we are. The other thing I was going to say is that project management doesn't necessarily have to be scary, and that you may well not be doing it already, but not calling it that. So what I'm going to say is that what we mean by project management is, well, what do we mean by a project? And a project is a piece of work with a finite end date. It has a point when it's done. And that may sound obvious, but in industry particularly, there are types of business, types of work which go on. If you work in a bakery, you make bread every day, and making bread is your daily business. That's not a project. That's kind of continuing business. But if you are in a factory and your factory makes loaves of bread, but you have a new machine that you get in so that you can bake bread differently or faster or whatever, then installing and implementing that machine is a project, and then the operation of that machine then becomes business as usual, as people say. So the key thing is that a project is a piece of work with a finite end date. It usually has multiple intermediate deadlines, and it often has a fixed budget that you need to manage, not always. And it's worth saying that most academic work is of this nature. If you're studying for a PhD or a master's, you've got a fixed period of time to get it done. If you're a little bit more senior and you're involved in working on research grants, again, there's a fixed time frame. And it also applies to things like talk courses and field work. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's going to happen. But my key point is, you've probably been a project manager without realizing it. If you've cooked a meal, you've organized a party or a holiday, you've produced a play, a film, a concert, put on an exhibition, you've done home improvements, any kind of thing that's involved organizing a piece of work to be done by a particular time, then you've been a project manager. I like to stress this, that this is a useful skill in its own right, and it's probably something you may have had some experience of doing before. The key thing really is to get it done by the deadline. And I'm always very annoyed by when you hear politicians particularly talk about delivery of some public project, whether it's a new road or something like that, and they say, oh, it was done on time and on budget. And this is always a little bit disingenuous, I think, because the key thing is not getting it done on time and on budget, important as that is. The important thing is estimating what the time and the budget were when you started. And the biggest challenge in project management is estimating, because if the more complex the project, the more novel, the more risky, the less likely you are to be able to estimate it correctly. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have a go. And the easiest way to estimate something is if you've done it before. But if you haven't done it before, then you should try and break it down into the smallest possible chunks. And then you can estimate each chunk, each task, either yourself, or you can pass it to a specialist, pass it to someone else who can help you. And so we would then, once you've broken it down into these tasks, then you can assemble the tasks in sequence, and you can look for what's called the critical path, which is the route through the project, which allows the project to take the shortest possible time. Usually you end up with multiple things happening in parallel, and so some things become a constraint. I'm going to explain this a bit more in a minute. And then there's a way of laying this out, which is called a Gantt chart, named after a chap called Henry Gantt, who was an engineer and an early management theorist, which is a kind of graphical way to lay out a project. And the way I recommend doing this, and I'm going to give you an example in a sec, is to actually start with Post-it notes on a big sheet of paper or on a whiteboard, or just on your desk, and you write each task on the Post-it note, and then you arrange them into a logical sequence. And then once you've done that, you can then draw your Gantt chart, and you can do it in Excel or PowerPoint, but there is also proper software for doing it, Microsoft Project, or there's a free project called free tool called Gantt Project, which I use sometimes, that makes them easy to draw. So having introduced that, I'm going to show you an example, and I'm going to use the example of making a roast dinner. So I actually think this is a roast dinner and a fried breakfast are both the classic examples of bits of project management in cooking, in British cuisine anyway. So here we have our roast dinner with some roast lamb and some roast potatoes and some vegetables and a Yorkshire pudding and some gravy. And what I've done is work out the sequence. So here I've done, in this graphic here, you can see I've written it on my Post-it notes that I need to heat up the oven and cook the meat, and then the meat has to come out the oven and rest for a bit before I cut it up, and then I carve it and serve. And then after I've rested the meat, I can make the gravy using the meat tin. There are potatoes, there's a path for the potatoes, peel the potatoes, pre-cook them, then roast them, prepare the vegetables and then cook them, make the Yorkshire pudding, the batter for the Yorkshire pudding, and the tin has to be preheated, and then they put the pudding batter in the tin, and then all of that has to be coordinated and served at the end. So you can see whether I've sort of written out the tasks there, arranged them into a sequence, and then drawn lines between them to show how the execution of the project works. And then I've then turned that into my Gantt chart, and the magic of the Gantt chart is that each of these tasks then becomes a line in the Gantt chart. And each bar represents the time taken for the task to complete. So these columns here are minutes or hours. This one's not particular. This one is to scale, but it's drawn in a thing that represents days. So that's why I haven't shown a time axis, but these are basically minutes of cooking. So what you can see here is that actually cooking this piece of roast lamb, this is the critical path, is cooking the meat, because the meat takes the longest to cook. And then everything else can happen in parallel. And then everything has to be synchronized at the end when you're ready to serve it, because you want to serve everything hot. So that's the idea of project planning, is to work out what this sequence is. And there's a load more you can do with Gantt charts. You can allocate resources to them. So if you're working with multiple people, you can work out, okay, have I got enough people to do this job or not? Am I going to run out of people at a critical stage if I have too many tasks in parallel? But the main thing is just getting the sequence. Have I got enough time? And is there enough, and what's on the critical path, and what has more flexibility in terms of when it can happen? Because I could, for example, peel and pre-cook the potatoes right at the beginning, and then give myself time to do other things in the meantime, which is actually how I do cook a roast dinner. But those tasks can float; they can move around. So that's a very brief introduction to planning and the Gantt chart. As I say, you can look up more about that later on. But the key next step, having made the Gantt chart, and I have to say this is always a little bit of a conceptual thing, is how do you then execute the project? How do you get on with it? How do you operate the project? And the Gantt chart is often quite high level, and it's usually planned at a resolution of days or working hours sometimes, but it's usually planned in a kind of at a quite a high level. And it's usually you obviously should go back and look at it regularly and update it, but actually one of the key things when you're doing the day-to-day work, you need something a little bit more fine-grained, and you need to decide, okay, how am I going to decide what I need to do right now? And a lot of people like to-do lists, and I've been a great user of to-do lists over the years, but I actually find that they're not as helpful as some other approaches, because they tend to fill up with frustratingly not quite done things. There's usually quite a process between something being started and actually being done. So what I like is the Kanban board, which is like a more useful to-do list and is much easier to use when you work with other people. And I'm going to explain that in a sec. Kanban comes from Japan. It actually means sort of signboard or notice board, and it was originally done on paper on the wall of a factory to show people who were working as a team within a factory how their work was progressing. And the way it works is really simple, is each task that needs to be done or is being done is written on a card or a post-it note, and then you arrange these cards using blue tack or sticky notes or whatever into columns. And these columns, traditionally, the simplest one is just not started, doing, done. This is my version of the Kanban board, which I like with 4 columns. So I have my not started item here, and a column on the left saying that these are things I need to be doing. The doing column is stuff I'm doing right now or that I'm going to do today. This is what I'm trying to do today. At the beginning of the day, move a couple of tasks onto that column. And then the other 2 right-hand columns, blocked awaiting input from others is really helpful. What that means is that I've done as much as I can on this piece of work and I've handed it off to someone else. And I'm waiting for them to get back to me. So in this case, I'm doing sort of a report on some work I've done with Kathy. I've sent it to Kathy for her comments. I can't do any more on that until she comes back to me. So it's in the block column because it's not done, but equally I can't do any more with it. So it doesn't need to sit in my doing column. And what that column also helpfully does is when I next look at the Kanban chart, I go, oh, Kathy hasn't got back to me. And so I can remind her that I'm waiting for her to send me some comments. Then the right-hand column is called completed this week, because in my current job and actually in my previous life as an engineering consultant, I nearly always have had weekly meetings with my boss or my client. And so it's really helpful to collect up on a week-to-week basis. What did I do over the last week? And then when I have my meeting, I then can, in preparing for my meeting, I can then say, oh yeah, here are all the things that I've done. And then I clear that column down and start again for the new week after my meeting. So yeah, when you just basically move stuff around. When I'm done with drawing the graphs, they go on the completed column. So Kanban is really simple. You can do it a physical one on a poster board or a notice board. There are loads of great digital ones. Trello is perhaps the best known. There's one called Asana, which I've not used, but other people recommend. The one I use at the moment for managing my work is Microsoft Planner, which is built into Office 365. And so if your institution has that, then you can get that very easily. It's tasks.office.com. I have to say it's not always 100% reliable, which is not a good thing in a Kanban system. And I am looking at some other ones as well. Yeah, it might be worth a quick look. And I usually try and look at it at the start and end of each day. Sometimes I manage to remember to look at it when I break for lunch as well. And I just try and keep up with what I'm doing. And yeah, as I say, the completed this week column is really helpful for a weekly meeting. Okay, moving on. The other thing in operating project is that life bowls random tasks at you which weren't in the project plan. We have this concept that as stuff comes in, people ask you to do things. Your colleague has a crisis, there's some administrative thing that you didn't realize you had to do, and stuff comes in and you have to decide, okay, am I going to let that task, that incoming email, derail me from my project or what? And there is always more work is my message here. There will always be another email. There will always be something that comes along. And so you have to kind of prioritize and work out what's important and what's not important. To answer Alexandra's question, yes, the recording will be available later. I apologize, this is quite a quick course, so I apologize, I'm talking quite fast, and you will be able to watch it back on the recording later. Yeah, so to kind of pick up on this matrix here is from a business school. Business schools really love 2x2 matrices, by the way. If you ever talk to people from business schools, you'll discover that there's a couple of different, there's loads of different 2x2 matrices which end up with 4 different categories. They really love that. Anyway, this one has is one of these classic ones. And the idea here is we have tasks classified as important and as urgent. And so an important task is one that is important to you. You need to have it done. It's part of your project. Stuff that's not important is not important to you. It might be important to someone else, but it's not important to you. And then urgent, not urgent. Urgent, it has to be done right now or within the next, very short window. Not urgent, it can be done later, but it's on your radar. So when we combine these, we end up with these 4 boxes. So if the task is both important and urgent, you have no choice. You must drop everything and do it now, or do it very soon. And you want to do a proper job of it because it's important to you, so you need to do it nicely. Where it gets more complicated is if the task is urgent but not important. So if somebody emails you saying, please, can you do this? You need to do this right now. And you're like, well, actually, that's not important to me, but it might be important to them. And so if it's not important to you, try and get out of it. You don't have to do everything everyone asks you. You can say, I can't do that, I'm sorry. You can delegate it to somebody else. You can go back to the person saying, I'm really busy right now, can someone else do it? And if you find yourself forced into doing that task because nobody else will do it and the other person is insisting, then you should do the minimum. You should do it quickly and not worry about it too much. Just send it off, and don't worry too much about it, because you don't want this non-important task to sap your time away from things that are more important. And then when the task is not urgent but important, again important to you, you should plan and do it later. It needs to go into the project plan. It needs to go into your diary. You need to think, okay, I'm going to do that next week. I can't do it now. It's not that urgent, but I'm going to plan and do it later. If it's not important and not urgent, then you shouldn't do it at all, unless you think it's going to get worse. If it's going to come back and bite you, if it's going to become more urgent or become more important in the future, then again, it should go on the plan and get done at some point in the future. But yeah, if it's not important and not urgent, then definitely try and get out of it as much as you can. Okay, as I say, this is a very brief trot through. Timesheets and budgets. These are both tools. Sometimes you will find these get imposed on you by other people. I actually find that having both of these things is something I like to have. I like to understand how much time I have, how much money I have on my project. So a timesheet is a record of how many hours you spend working on a given project. And it's most valuable when you work on more than one project. If you're doing several different things at once, then a timesheet shows you how much time you're devoting to each project, as long as you remember to fill it in. And that can help you with things like, how much am I committed to? All these interesting side projects I'm doing, which I really enjoy, how much are they distracting me from my main thrust of my research? And I've just recently started using a tool called Toggle Track, which is a website and a browser extension, which makes it really easy to compile a timesheet. It can be a little bit frustrating. A lot of researchers I know dislike timesheeting. It's quite a good self-discipline exercise for a week or so, just to do the timesheet using Toggle or something similar, and just see where your time goes. How much of your time was spent doing your core research, how much was spent doing admin, how much was spent doing voluntary activities like this, how much was spent on training, that kind of thing. And it can be instructive to see where your time goes. The equivalent for money is, of course, a budget, and you need to keep track of the money you've spent, and you can use it to plan ahead. The thing I find most helpful is a budget spreadsheet helps you avoid committing the same money to two different things. If you think, okay, I'm going to go to a conference next year, I need to allocate £1,000 to go into that conference, then you need to remember that that was what you planned to do and not mentally allocate that £1,000 to doing something else. So I find that my budget spreadsheet both keeps track of the money I've committed to things, so I can see the total winding down. I can work out how much uncommitted money do I have free to spend on things. But also, if I think, okay, I'm going to allocate some money to going to that conference next year or buying that piece of equipment in a couple of months' time, then I put that on the budget as if I've already spent it, so that I know that the free total left is always, okay, how much money do I have to decide? If somebody says to me, oh, do you want to come to this event, or do you want to buy this equipment, or whatever, I know how exactly. I can look at the budget very quickly and see how much money I have left. Quick note for the PhD students in the room, you probably have a budget allocated to you as part of your PhD, and I really strongly encourage you to ask your supervisor if you can see the budget reports and learn how university budgeting works, because it's a useful skill, and knowing how much money is in your budget is very empowering. Because if your supervisor is unscrupulous, and I really hope they aren't, they might be spending money that's notionally allocated to you on other things. So yeah, do get used to keeping your own budgets. I think it's a good idea. Okay, I'm going to move on to talking about working with other people now. Yeah, I'm going to say that in my experience, the best thing about doing research, particularly about doing polar research, is working with other people. Working with brilliant other people is one of the greatest pleasures in life. But it can also be incredibly frustrating. And so some general tips on how to work with other people. Communication is absolutely everything. The majority of issues you find with working with other people are caused by misunderstandings or miscommunications or crossed wires. And if you tell people what's going on and you listen to what they say, then generally you can get on, even if that person is not terribly pleasant. I would, if you have a meeting or a Zoom call, a virtual meeting, I always try, and what you're trying to get out of those meetings often is decisions or actions, and I usually like to be my own secretary, and I send an email around everybody afterwards saying, okay, here's what we agreed to do in the meeting and the dates. Jim has promised to do this, Rosie has promised to do that. Here's what we're all going to do. So that, because what happens is people promise stuff in meetings and then they forget about it the moment the meeting's over. So having some notes, reminds them, they can put it on their to-do list or Kanban board or whatever, and it also protects you a little bit, because when you go to remind them, you can say, actually, you agreed to do this in the meeting. Sometimes it's helpful to remind other people about things. Particularly when I'm organizing things on a sort of semi-voluntary basis, I usually check in partway through the time that's allocated for something to do, and I just say, hey Edwin, how are you getting on with X? Because maybe 20-30% of the time Edwin has forgotten. And so if you check in partway through, they're like, oh yes, I meant to do that for you, and then they get on with it. So I quite often put myself a reminder in my diary going, okay, I'm going to remember that I need to remind him or her to get on with it. Yes, getting people to do things. This is what delegating means, getting other people to do things for you. But when you might think, oh, I'm not a manager, I'm not in charge, so I don't delegate. But chances are you do ask people to do things all the time. You ask admin people, you ask colleagues to do some piece of work for you that you're not able to do yourself, or you're not authorized to do yourself. And the way I like to go about this is that you start by asking people some questions at the beginning. How do I do this? What is the process? If I go to my admin, my departmental admin, as I do quite often at the moment, and say, because Cardiff's in the process of changing quite a lot of its internal processes, so I had to say to John the other week, I'm going to Norway to a conference. How do I book a flight now that we've changed the new process? I ask John, he tells me what the process is, then I know, and he knows that I know, and then we don't get off on the wrong foot where I start trying to do it the way I think it ought to work, and then I discover partway through that that's not actually how it's supposed to be done. The other helpful questions to ask other people are, what do you need from me? You know, do you need me to write you a very detailed description of what I want, or do you need me to fill in a form? Do I need to pay for this? Those kinds of questions. And how long do you need? If somebody is busy, do they need 3 or 4 weeks notice of something to happen, or can they do it right away? And then be really clear. What do you want? When do you want it by? And what resources can you offer? This is a simple example. Please, can you arrange some poster printing for me? We need them by the 1st of May, and I'm happy to spend up to £100. That it's nice and clear. You've got a deadline, you've got a resource. The other person is then empowered, to use the jargon, to go off and do it. They know what they can then work within the constraints that you've set. I know this is really obvious, but say please and thank you. It goes a long way, particularly to administrative or technical staff, lab technicians, finance people. There can be a certain arrogance amongst researchers to that these people are your servants and they should be ordered around. No, that's not how it works. They deserve your courtesy, and if you are nice to them, they will go the extra mile for you when you are stuck. That's my lesson. A really simple one. From my years ago, I worked in a consulting firm, and I went to one of our technicians who was actually going to make me a piece of metalwork that I needed as part of a demonstration that I was going to give to a customer. And I said to Pete, that was his name. I said to him, "Can I have this? Could I have this by Friday? I'm going to take it to see a customer in Germany." And he did it. I took the equipment to see the customer. We had a really great meeting. I came back in the following week and met Pete in the lab, and I said, "Thank you very much for doing that. We had a really good meeting with the customer and they were really pleased with it." And he was so delighted, because he said, "I never normally hear the end of the story. People usually say please when they want something, then they take it away from me, and then I never find out what happened next." So he was really pleased. So if somebody helps you and it helps you get a good result, share that with your support staff, with your colleagues. They want to share in your joy, and they want to feel they contributed to your work. Again, yeah, arrange review dates and nudges. It's really helpful. Again, people are busy. Sometimes they drop the ball. Sometimes they forget about you. It's helpful to say, "Okay, I'm going to check in with you in 2 weeks' time, and we'll see how you're getting on." Okay, next bit. How to write a good email. Again, hopefully some of this is obvious, but it's important. I like to sort of put this across and say this is the best way to deal with somebody who's busy. Academics in particular get huge volumes of email, and so what I would say is use the subject line wisely. Ideally, it should act as the abstract to your email, to use the sort of scientific way of saying it. So don't write an email where the subject line is "Can you do me a favor?" or even worse, "Hey." Use it. Say what you want, and say whether you need some kind of response in the email. It is a bit. It does look quite officious if you write "action required," but something like, "Can you help?" Question, something like that. It indicates that person, authorization request, something like that, is that you can put in the subject line, along with what it is. So I've put here, good example, "Poster printing, can you help?" So write an email, a greeting, "Hello, dear Dr. Jones," whatever. A quick pleasantry is optional but nice, particularly if you know that person. Come to the point immediately. "This is what I want. This is the thing that is important to me," in a quick sentence. And then if you need it, a call to action, which is sales jargon for "please do this thing." So you might say, if I write to my head of department and I say, "Dear Ian, I hope all's well, and that you had a good meeting yesterday with the so and so. I would like your authorization to spend £1,000 on this piece of instrumentation. Please, can you let me know and copy Vera in finance, so that I know so that we've both got your authorization. Thanks very much, Mike." That's the sort of way I would write. So that's the call to action, is the important thing. That's the thing you want them to do. So write it out explicitly what you want. Busy people ignore a lot of emails, so make your email as clear as possible. There's a sort of misconception sometimes that you need to kind of give a lot of context and build up, and you end up writing a whole paragraph. And actually what you want is just come to the point and then ask. Little bit of etiquette around how email works. I've seen people write a little bit too formally and a little bit too informally. This is the one I like. I'm not saying this is the be all and end all, but this is what I do. If I write to somebody cold, if I write to somebody that I do not know and have not met, then I address them by their title, particularly in a university. So I would write, if I write to, I wrote to a professor actually in America who I didn't know. I was asking him for a letter of support for a grant application because he was an expert. Dear Professor D, that's his name, Professor D. I don't call him by his first name. He deserves my respect. Doubly so if this person is a woman. Doubly so if they're a person of color. Use their title. And then if they reply to you on the bottom of their email, that's how they want to be addressed. So if Dr. Jones replies, best regards, Jasmine, then you can write to your next email, dear Jasmine. That's an invitation for you to use their first name. If they don't, then stick to the title. So yeah, so that's the etiquette around titles. Okay, time's marching on. Okay, what to do if you're being ignored? Some people are just bad at replying to emails, and this will happen to you inevitably. If you're regularly being ignored and you need to get through, try a few techniques. A short reminder email, just short and to the point. Dear Clara, did you have a chance to look at my paper since we last spoke? This one is slightly pandemic variable, but if somebody has a phone in their office and you know they work in their office, you can call their desk phone or call their mobile if you have it. A good trick I learned from my days when I was a salesman is call people shortly before the start of the hour. If they're a lecturer, do this about 1:45 or 20 to the hour. If they're an administrator, call them about 10 to the hour, because most people have meetings that start on the hour. The reason I say lecturers to call earlier is because lecturers give lectures, and so that if the timetable starts on the top of the hour, they're actually going to be walking to the next lecture theatre and you'll miss them. Yeah, call people before the top of the hour. They're more likely to answer the phone than after the top of the hour. A technique I used to use a lot during my PhD. So I did my PhD based at British Antarctic Survey in Cambridge, but my university was the University of Leicester, which was a 2-hour train ride away. And Professor Warrington, my supervisor, was a busy chap, and he didn't always, I didn't always know, even if he was in the office, because I was remote. So we got to the point of being more or less on first name terms, and I would say, hello Sue, is Professor Warrington in today? And she'd say, no Mike, I haven't seen him. And I'd like, oh fine, okay. Whereas other times she would say, oh yes, he's in he's in a management meeting, or he's in a supervisory meeting, but I'll remind him that you called. Be nice to PAs and secretaries. They have the keys to the kingdom. They're really helpful. My last point on here, this is a thing you have to do sometimes with academics, the presumed consent approach. This is most commonly used when you're writing a paper with someone, unfortunately, but it does often happen. It does sometimes happen in other ways. You need somebody's authorization, but they're too busy to talk to you. So you write to them giving lots of notice, like 2 or 3 weeks notice minimum for this technique. Dear Sanjay, I'm planning to submit the paper on Tuesday the 15th of September. Please let me have any changes before then. Otherwise, I will assume you are happy with me submitting on your behalf. If you have a paper with a lot of co-authors, this is a very useful technique, because otherwise chasing around everybody to get their authorization. When you submit the paper, you have to tick a box on the publisher's website saying, yes, all the authors consented to this being published. So this is the way you do it if people won't talk to you. If they won't talk to you, why are you co-authoring with them? But that's a whole other question. It's sometimes necessary. I hope you don't have to use this technique, but it's one to keep in your back pocket in case you need it. Okay, coming on, you'll notice the theme of this presentation gets increasingly into how to deal with difficult people as we go on. So the next one is managing up. And this is managing your relationship with somebody senior to you, a supervisor or a manager. And what I would say to you from some experience is, if your manager or supervisor is inexperienced or overworked, they may not give you very much direction, which is to say, this is what I recommend that you do. And they may not give you very much validation, which is, yes, I agree, that's a good idea. So you should make it as easy as possible for them to do so. Take responsibility yourself. Try and arrange the meetings yourself and get them to agree. If it isn't working, if they constantly cancel your meetings or just don't show up, then write to them saying, this isn't working, how about a different time, and propose a different time. You can write to them cold saying, this is what I'm planning to do this week, and stay on top of your own promises and actions. The most useful technique I would say here is make it easy for them to give input. So it's much easier to ask for validation from somebody who's busy and ignoring you than to ask for direction. So if you say, I'm planning to do X, is that okay? I've already considered Y and Z because I've ruled them out. Then they will probably write back to you and say, yes, that's fine. But even if they don't write back to you, again, you're sort of presuming their consent. They can't say they weren't told. Whereas if you write to somebody who's busy and say, I'm stuck, I need help, even if that's what you are, then the chances are they'll just totally ignore you because they're like, oh, can't deal with that. I've got too many other things to deal with. So yeah, make a concrete proposal is easier for somebody busy to deal with. In that situation, and I don't wish it on anybody, you may need to draw on your network. You may need to ask other people to act as a sounding board for your ideas. In the situation I've been in the past, sometimes you can find someone in the canteen, someone in the departmental office, another academic colleague, somebody who has been around the block a little bit and will give you some of their time because your supervisor won't. Sometimes you can borrow stuff off you can do this mutually with a peer, but it's quite helpful to find somebody senior who can help you. But yeah, I don't wish this on you, but sometimes it's necessary. Okay, coming on and getting increasingly serious, boundaries. So when I say boundaries, I'm not talking about cricket here. I mean when to say yes and how to say no. And the important lesson to learn here, and I've learned this the hard way, is that power dynamic is a useful concept and it's very important. It is much harder to say no to somebody who is more senior than you. And also bear in mind that many people don't like thinking about the power dynamic, particularly if they're new to managing people. They don't really realize, they think, oh, we're all one happy family. Actually, they don't realize that they will say stuff that comes across to their juniors. So I have come across managers who have made jokes about having people sacked, and the manager knows they're joking, but the employee does not know they're joking, and that's not very that's not nice to even have the possibility brought up. Likewise, I once had a manager who joked with me that he thought I was taking too much holiday, and I was like, well, no, actually, I'm taking the holiday I'm entitled to, thank you. And that doesn't help. And he thinks he's joking. He thinks he's being funny, but it's not. So yeah, that's what power dynamic is about. What I will say for the perspective of research students, remember, this is your work. Even though it may not be your money, it might be your supervisor's money, but this is your project. This is your research project. And part of growing up as a researcher, part of the transition through 3 years of a PhD, 3.5, 4 years, whatever, is that at some point you will probably know more about your subject than your supervisor does. That's the point of getting a PhD. So you can say no to them, and that it's not all. That's part of the experience is learning how to do it. So how do we say no? When you should say no every time is when this issue affects your personal safety. Okay. The next two are you can be a little bit more flexible on when you're being asked to do something that does not benefit your own work. Think hard about whether saying no is a good idea. I would usually say it is a good idea to say no at that point. And again, when you feel you are overcommitted, again, this is a classic thing in academia. I'm a little bit prone to it, getting overcommitted. Loads of fun things to do, loads of people to help, loads of great things to do. You can then you look at your diary and you go, oh my God, how am I going to get everything done? So say no when you feel overcommitted. So the way to say no is to start by, particularly to somebody senior to you, making the point here, I know you asked me to do X, but I've thought about it, it's going to cause Y and Z problems. Can we find another way to do it? How about? And you propose an alternative. And the alternatives become, don't do it. Can we just not do that? I don't want to go to this conference. I don't want to do this piece of lab work. I don't think it's necessary. You can get someone else to do it, or you can propose a different way to do the task. And then, so if you do that, if you say no and propose an alternative, you make it clear that you've thought about it, that you're not just digging your heels in and being intransigent, then most people will then back down and say, yeah, fine, okay, I'm disappointed. Sometimes they might say, I'm disappointed, but that'll be all right. Very rarely will somebody pull rank. Now, this is an expression from the military where pulling rank means that when somebody junior to you in the military hierarchy politely suggests to their senior officer that this is not a good idea, and the senior officer says, no, I'm giving you a direct order, you must do it, then that's called pulling rank. And it happens in civilian organizations all the time as well. Hopefully it won't happen to you too often, but people do it. They say, I've listened to what you've said, but I want you to do it anyway. What I will say about pulling rank is that it's quite a red flag that somebody might be a bully. If they pull rank on you a lot, they probably are. They're certainly a bad manager if they pull rank on you a lot. So if someone pulls rank on you, get it in writing, because the chances are you've made an objection and they are overruling you, and you want it absolutely in black and white that they are the one that authorized this. Because if you're already telling them this is a bad idea, and it might be a bad idea from a safety point of view, you want the blame pinned to them if something goes badly wrong. If it's something that's safety critical and you are still concerned about it and they're pulling rank, go to a higher authority, go to a safety officer, go to a head of department, go to somebody else who has the power to tell the person, hang on a minute, you're being unreasonable. Be prepared to stand your ground and ask for support from colleagues, because this can be emotionally very difficult. Sometimes it's necessary to suck it up and just do it anyway when someone pulls rank on you. But what I would say from some experience is keep a log of occasions when it happens, because the chances are, as I say, if someone is pulling rank on you, that's one of the signs of bullying behavior. And from experience, which I can only sort of talk about, having a log of occasions when somebody engages in bullying behavior on you is very helpful should you ever need to see a solicitor. Okay, I won't say any more than that, but yeah, I hope you won't ever need this advice, but it's there if you need it. Some final points. Managing your work. I know this is really, really hard at the moment because of the pandemic and people working remotely. Try and keep your work time and your personal time separate. Turn off your work email when you're not working. If you're not working, you're not looking at your work email. Especially turn it off on your phone. I actually have on my phone, I have an iPhone, there's a little slider in the accounts option. You can just switch the email off temporarily whilst remaining logged in. And what I tend to do is I leave my calendaring switched on so I can see my work calendar, because that's helpful when planning my social life. Can I take an appointment with the doctor in the middle of the day? Have I got another meeting? But having the email switched off is what I do. When I travel, I'm traveling for work, I have my email switched on my phone because I'm working. But if I'm not, what otherwise happened to me in the past is you work with people in a different time zone, or people who work at different hours of the day. You see a work email at 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the evening. It breaks into your relaxation. It fires your brain up again. You don't sleep properly. It just is not great. The other thing I would say about email is I have a rule on Outlook. I've done this since 1998 when I first worked in a job with email. I have a rule that separates my mailing list emails from emails addressed to me. So emails that come around on the departmental circular list, emails that come around on the all staff mailing list, different emails that come from collaboration mailing lists that I'm involved in, they all go off into a separate inbox. I have a big one called circulars, which basically contains all the university circular emails. And then I have separate ones for my collaborations and mailing lists. And that means that my inbox mostly contains emails that are directly relevant to me, where I'm the addressee or I'm in the CC line. Whereas ones coming from mailing lists, they can pile up and I can look and I can skim through them quickly at leisure. And that way my email inbox doesn't feel so full when I look at it. Think about how you allocate your time. I'm a morning person, so I prefer to do my thinking and writing in the morning. And I'm often a little bit, if I've had some lunch, I'm often a little bit slow when I come back. So I quite often, if I have a boring admin task to do, like filling in an expenses claim, I tend to do that after lunch, because it doesn't need very much brain power and it gets me back into it. If you're busy, and I know this world of remote working has made this even more entertaining, because now we, as well as having email, we have Slack and Teams and WhatsApp and whatever else we're using. Try and turn off your email and your IM while you're working. This is particularly if you're trying to write. Having lots of distractions is really annoying. So I quite often, if I really want to try and write a bit of paper, I will just log off everything for 4 hours or something while I'm writing. The other thing, switching tasks is quite a lot of brain effort. So again, try and plan to do one thing at a time and switch around natural breaks. I tend to stop for coffee mid-morning and tea mid-afternoon and lunch. And so I switch tasks more or less at those meal breaks, rather than switching back and forth too much between during my working day. It's not always possible, but I try and do it. Okay, so that's the end of the sort of formal part of the presentation. As I say, it was a very brisk trot through, and I will pick up a few of people's comments in here. Just some final recommendations. I'm going to ask Prem to send the slides around to everyone who was in the meeting afterwards, so you can get all these links without having to write them down. I really recommend a book called No Hard Feelings by Liz Foslin and Molly West Duffy, which is about managing your emotions at work. It's really interesting. It's really well done. I really love Alison Green's Ask a Manager column, which is like an agony aunt for workplace issues. She's American, so a lot of it is American based, but it's fascinating, and it's full of, like all agony aunt columns, it's full of really horrible people and really dreadful experiences that you're just like, oh, I'm so glad I wasn't there. But there's also loads and loads of really useful advice and helpful commentary on, how to deal with difficult situations. If you think you would like to be a project manager, and it's a good way to make money, if you are looking for a career and you like organizing people and you're good at dealing with keeping lots of plates spinning, then I would recommend looking at the APMP framework, the Association of Project Management Professionals. There are 2 or 3 different frameworks. APMP, I think, is the best one. I studied a different one called Prince 2, which is a British one, which I don't recommend, but APMP is quite good. And there's a video link there to a chap called Chris Croft, who was one of the people who taught me project management a few years ago. And he gives a sort of whistle-stop tour in a YouTube video of APMP in about 15 minutes, so you get a feel for what it's about. But it's broadly what I described in the first sort of 5 or 6 slides of this presentation. So that's the end of the slides. I'm going to stop sharing the slides for the moment. And I'm going to pick up some of the questions from the